Hi everybody, I'm Ryan, and over the course of the last few weeks, we have been analyzing mono green devotion, mono green Nykthos, whatever you want to call it, in Pioneer. We've done a basic deck tech, we've done sideboard guides, we've analyzed flex slots and had different ways you can build the deck, and we've talked about play pattern nuances with the deck. And that brings us to this video, which is a compilation of all of those things so you can have all the information from our analysis of mono green Nykthos all in one place. So green players, enjoy. Today we're going to talk about mono green devotion in Pioneer. Now this deck has gone through quite a few iterations, especially since the banning of Karn, but has become very powerful and is somehow still a combo deck. So let's take a look. This is the mono green deck in Pioneer. The main deck is pretty set in stone and stock. The sideboard, there's a little bit of wiggle room, but let's start with the lands. We're running a ton of forests. You know, come in untapped, can't be touched by scary things like Field of Ruin and whatever is all very important. 2 Boseiju, on color, main deck, artifact and enchantment hate is also very important. We're playing a 1 of Sunken Citadel because between Lair of the Hydra, Boseiju, and Nykthos, we have a lot of lands that want to be activated for really cheap. But the issue is coming to play tapped really matters with this deck. So we're just doing it as a fun of 1 of. We're playing 2 Lair of the Hydra, another on-color land that comes into play untapped if we play it early. And we can play green and X to have it become an XX Hydra creature. That is still a land, which is very relevant because sometimes we will run out of gas but have a ton of mana, and we can finish them off with Lair of the Hydra. Unfortunately, Lair of the Hydra does not have trample, so meh. And we're playing the kind of big shot card of the deck, the card that this deck wouldn't exist without, Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, which taps for colorless. However, we can pay 2 mana, tap it, and choose a color, and add an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. So this entire deck is based around Nykthos and making an obscene amount of mana with Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. So let's go through the cards in our deck. I'm just going to go by mana cost. So we're playing a playset of each of the green mana dorks, 4 Llanowar Elves, 4 Elvish Mystic, both because it's a 1 mana and we add a devotion for just 1 mana, but also because we want to ramp our mana as fast as possible so that we can cast our other spells as fast as possible. Playing a 1 of Oath of Nissa. This can also be replaced with a Polukranos, but I like Oath of Nissa to help smooth out the draws. Also, it exists on the battlefield as a devotion. We're playing 4 Invasion. Whoop. Can I not look at it? Oh, I'm freezing. Okay, there. We're playing 4 Invasion of Ixalan. When it enters, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a permanent card from among them, put into your hand, put the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. That's our whole deck. They're all permanents, besides Storm the Festival. So we look at the top 5 cards and just put a card that isn't Storm the Festival into our hand, which is just excellent, smooths out the draws, but it can also be attacked and turned into a 4/3 with Trample. That can gain indestructible when we cast a spell, which is making combat a lot better. Also notably, it adds devotion. Playing Outcaster Trailblazer. It's a 3 mana 4/2. When it enters the battlefield, add a mana of any color. Whenever another creature you control with power 4 or greater enters, draw a card, which is excellent because we're playing a lot of big dumb dummies. And we can plot for 3 mana as well. You'd want to plot this card if you are worried about it getting removed or are not using the mana immediately, because very often getting mana and getting as many creatures on the battlefield as possible and drawing as many cards as possible is the best part and most important part of this deck. We are playing 4 Old Growth Troll, mostly because it's efficiently costed. It's 3 green pips for Nykthos, but also it's a 3 mana 4/4, and it's very easy for us to get those green pips. And when it dies, we can return it to the battlefield as an aura with Enchant Forest, where the Enchanted Forest has tap, add 2 green, and we can pay 1 mana and tap it and sacrifice the land to create a 4/4 Troll Warrior creature token with trample, so we can kind of make another one. What's really relevant about that is the aura is also triple green because literally the card is returning, so it can continue to add devotion while having those abilities in the land. So it makes it actually a pretty difficult card to remove from the battlefield. Playing 4 Ikora Behemoth Beckoner. It's a 7 loyalty planeswalker for 3 mana. When a creature you control with power 4 or greater enters, draw a card. So it's a similar ability as Outcaster Trailblazer. And we can -1 to untap target permanent. Sometimes we're going to be doing this to creatures. Most of the time, we're going to be doing this to Nykthos. So we can activate Nykthos for a whole mess of mana, untap it, activate it again for another whole mess of mana. And its static ability is very relevant in this deck, just like Outcast or Trailblazer. We're playing 2 Ulvenwald Oddity. This is one of the cards in the combo. I'll explain the combo after I get done explaining the cards. It's a 4 mana 4/4 with Trample Haste, and we can transform it for 7 mana. When it's transformed, it's an 8/8 with Trample Haste, and other creatures you control get +1/+1 and have Trample and Haste. We're playing 4 Leyline of the Guild Pact. This card doesn't do a lot for our deck. It color fixes us for Elesh Norn, which is kind of cool. We'll talk about Elesh Norn in just a sec. But the main thing that it does is we can put it onto the battlefield in our opening hand and then immediately have 4 Devotion, which creates sort of a nut draw where we can be activating Nykthos as early as turn 2 if we played a turn 1 Mana Dork. We can be activating Nykthos for 5 and casting Cavalier of Thorns as early as turn 2, which is really, 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 really hard for our opponents to deal with. And so devoting 4 slots to having a really high-powered nut hand is very relevant. Speaking of Cavalier is a 5 mana with 3 green pips, 5/6. With Reach, when it enters, you reveal the top 5 cards of your library. Put a land card from among them onto the battlefield and the rest into your graveyard. And when it dies, you can exile it if you do put target card from your graveyard on top of your library. So similar to Old Growth Troll, it's 3 green pips and very annoying to remove, because if you remove it from anything that isn't exile, you can put cards that like really matter on top of your library. Like if you already have a Cavalier in your graveyard, you can put it on top of your library and keep providing threats, or Storm the Festival or whatever, which is extremely powerful. In addition, notice that the land enters the battlefield untapped, so you can very, very much like at some point in the game add a bunch of mana with Nykthos, use it to cast Cavalier. Cavalier adds an additional 3 green pips, grab a Nykthos with the Cavalier trigger, be able to activate the Nykthos again, and add even more mana, which is just adds this crazy perpetual thing. And the last engine of the deck is Storm the Festival. It's a 6 mana sorcery. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put 2 permanent cards with mana value 5 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order, and has flashback for 10 mana. 10 mana, not a big deal once we get rolling with this, but really this allows us to put all these super, super powerful permanents on the battlefield, increasing our devotion and continuing this thing. Also notice increasing that devotion matters because then we can flashback Storm the Festival and just put a ridiculous amount of creatures on the battlefield. Also notice it's permanent, so we can be grabbing Nykthos if we really want to. We're kind of sad if we're grabbing a land, but it's still very, very good. Now let's talk about how this deck actually works, because I mentioned that it's a combo deck. Now, part of the combo is just making a ton of mana with Nykthos, untapping Nykthos with Kiora, making even more mana, casting Storm the Festival a whole bunch, like blah, 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 blah. But what can happen with this deck is once we have a lot of mana with Nykthos, we can begin to be casting Outcaster Trailblazers and Kioras, so that whenever we cast an Old Growth Troll, an Ulvenwald Oddity, or a Cavalier of Thorns, or another Outcaster Trailblazer, we're drawing cards. And as we draw cards, we're filling up our hand, which allows us to do things like play a second Nykthos, or untap the Nykthos with Kiora, to create even more mana, or cast even more Storm the Festivals, or play a Cavalier to eventually hit another Nykthos. Or once we're rolling, the big reason we're playing Invasion instead of Oath of Nissa, being able to play Invasion to dig for another Nykthos. And be able to put a ridiculous amount of permanence on the battlefield because we have an obscene amount of mana and are drawing an obscene amount of cards from Kiora and Outcaster Trailblazer, untapping Nykthos, tapping it for more mana, getting another Nykthos onto the battlefield, tapping it for more mana, playing 2 or 3 Cavaliers because we've cast a bunch of Storm the Festivals and drawn a bunch of Outcaster Trailblazers and Kioras, eventually hitting like a 3rd Nykthos, tapping it for an obscene amount of mana, until eventually we hit Ulvenwald Oddity while we have 10 creatures on the battlefield, you know, between Outcaster Trailblazers, Mana Dorks, Old Growth Trolls, and Cavalier of Thorns. We get Ulvenwald Oddity out of the battlefield when we have a ridiculous amount of mana. We transform it. Everything gets +1/+1 trample and haste, and we swing for 40+. And that is the new combo of the deck. Besides that, the secondary mode of it is just a green beatdown deck that creates a ton of mana. But it can just win out of nowhere if you have a Kiora or an Outcaster Trailblazer on the battlefield, plus a lot of green pips. Now, as far as the sideboard goes, we're playing an Elesh Norn Mother of Machines. You probably noticed that Elesh Norn is off color. So this can be fixed for a couple different ways once we side Elesh Norn in. First off, Sunken Citadel, we can just name white. So that's one piece of color fixing. Second off, when we play an Outcaster Trailblazer, we can just add a white mana to get Elesh Norn onto the battlefield. Third off, if we have a Leyline of Guildpact on the battlefield, everything taps for every color anyway, so we can just use white mana. And then also, it can just be grabbed with Storm the Festival. So there are so many ways to get Elesh Norn on the battlefield, even though it's off color, that it is totally worth it to bring in, because not only does it amplify our effects, like the end of the battlefield draw card effects, Cavalier effects, invasion effects, oath effects, all that stuff. But we're bringing it in against decks that also have a lot of enter the battlefield effects, and we can just turn that off. We're bringing it against decks that really rely on it. Playing Pick Your Poison for our artifact and enchantment hate a little bit, but also flying creature hate. In addition to artifact and enchantment hate, we're playing Scrap Shooter, where we can, it's a 3-mana 4/4 with 2 green pips, already totally fine with reach, which is also very relevant against all of these Slickshot show-off decks. And when it enters, we can gift a card, so let them draw a card, destroy an artifact or enchantment opponent controls. Because of all these aggro decks, we're also playing Setessan Petitioner. I can barely ever say that. 3 mana with 2 green pips, 2/2, and enters, you gain life equal to your devotion to green, which can be a million. Playing Aresta the Endless Web. It's a 4-mana 3/5 with 2 green pips with reach. When opponent casts an instant sorcery spell, create a 1/2 green spider creature token with reach. This is mostly for Phoenix. It's also just like decent against decks that play a lot of instant sorceries. The Stone Brain. It's an extraction effect for 2 mana to cast and 2 mana to activate and exile it. It's really good against combo decks. 2 Unlicensed Hearse. It's for our graveyard decks. I don't feel like I need to explain Unlicensed Hearse. We're playing a Cityscape Leveler and an Emrakul, the Promised End, for decks that we really need to go over the top of and can answer. And it's very likely the games are going to go very, very long. Today we're going to be looking at mono green Nykthos and how to sideboard with it against the top 10 most popular decks in Pioneer. Now, if you want to learn more about the deck, I did a deck tech with it last week. You should definitely check that out. But without further ado, let's jump right in. This is my mono green Nykthos deck. It is pretty straightforward and stock, but I want to talk about what the cards in the sideboard are for. Elesh Norn, we are bringing in against most of the decks that have things that enter the battlefield that we like care about, like the mirror match and whatever. You might be noticing that Elesh Norn is off color. It's white, but we have a lot of ways to be able to play Elesh Norn. One is Sunken Citadel named White. 2, Outcaster Trailblazer can just like create a white colored mana. We also have Leyline of the Guildpact that if it's on the battlefield, we can just make white. With our lands. So there's a lot of ways. Oh, and Storm the Festival can just grab Elesh Norn. So there's a lot of ways that we can just like have Elesh Norn in the battlefield. I'm not really worried about it being off color, especially since there's only one. But again, it's for those decks that care about other things that enter the battlefield. Pick Your Poison when there's flying artifacts or enchantments that we care about. Scrap Shooter is a really good against artifacts and enchantments. It's also like a decent beater and well-costed beater with green pips for when we need to bring out a lot of a certain card. Setessan Petitioner is really good against all the aggro decks that are running around. Aresta of the Endless Web is mostly for Phoenix, but really if there's like flyers that we care about, especially if there's a lot of instant sorceries, or really any instant sorcery deck that doesn't run board wipes. The Stone Brain is for combo decks. Unlicensed Hearse is our graveyard hate, and Cityscape Leveler and Emrakul are for decks where we really need to go over the top, and decks where it's really unlikely for us to combo, and we just need some really powerful cards in our deck. That being said, a lot of the cards in our sideboard are hyper specialized because we are a really dedicated combo deck and we don't want to dilute our deck too much, so we aren't going to be boarding in most matchups. By the way, if you hear any children screaming, my kids are playing on the trampoline right outside my window. They decided to go out right when I clicked record because that's my life. But the most popular deck in Pioneer is the Rakdos aggro deck, the Callous Sellsword Fling deck, whatever you want to call it. Obviously, we're bringing in our Setessan Petitioner. And really, I'm just all about the blockers. So I actually really like Aresta, and I really like Scrap Shooter, just being able to block all the creatures in our opponent's deck and the flyers, in general. As far as cards that we're siding out, I do want us to notice that we are most of the time either going to be bringing out our consistency, so our invasions and our oaths, or our mana ramp, so in our elves. Sometimes it'll be a little bit of both. Sometimes, you know, it'll be both of these plus an Ulvenwald oddity or something like that. But most of the time it's going to be one or the other. It's really important for us to get out really fast against aggro, so we're going to be bringing out some of our consistency, or really all of our consistency, and then just a single Ulvenwald oddity. Because if we're comboing really hard and really shutting our opponents down, I'm okay with shaving one of them. They can't really interact with, you know, taking one out of our deck or whatever. So this is how I sideboard against Rakdos aggro. The second most popular deck is It Phoenix. Against Is It Phoenix, I'm a fan of Arasta. They kind of let us go really wide. In that case, and I like Unlicensed Hearse, and I like splitting what we take out. We're going to take out 2 elves. And then we're going to take out an Oath of Nissa and an Invasion. So that's how I sideboard against Phoenix. Against Blue-White Control, we're bringing in Stonebrain, mostly for like the board wipes, and bringing in Cityscape Leveler and Emrakul. And I like bringing out 3 elves and an Oath of Nissa. I really like Invasion against this deck as far as consistency goes, but this is how I sideboard against Blue-White Control. The fourth most popular deck is Jund Sacrifice. Now, normally I'd like Pick Your Poison against this deck, but they have so many artifact tokens, you can rarely ever snipe a Cauldron. However, Scrap Shooter takes that out. And then we're going to be bringing out 2 of the elves. It takes them a little bit to set up, and we're just the better combo deck. And so this is how I sideboard against Jund Sac. Next up is Selesnya Angels. We're going to be bringing in the Elesh Norn, because it just neuters the deck entirely. Pick Your Poison takes out Flyers, and then Scrap Shooter and Arasta buys us some time against this deck. And then I'm just going to be bringing out consistency. I'm not a huge fan of Old Growth Troll, so I'm actually going to be shaving on Old Growth Troll as well. And we're just trying to combo as fast as possible. So I sideboard against Angels. The sixth most popular deck is Rakdos Midrange, and I just say no changes against Rakdos Midrange. Our main plan is already very good against them, and really the way that we win is either having hard to answer threats or just comboing them. So no changes. Against the Gruul Prowessy deck, we're going to be sideboarding really similar to the red-black deck. We're bringing in Scrap Shooter, not Trawler. The Petitioner and Arasta mostly as blockers, and then we're going to be bringing out our consistency and a single elf. So I sideboard against Gruul aggro. The eighth most popular deck is the Mirror Match. Elesh Norn is excellent in the Mirror Match. Unfortunately, I think we have to bring in Pick Your Poison just so we have an answer to our opponent's nut hands with Leyline. The Stormbrain is very good if we can say Nykthos, and otherwise we're just trying to combo as fast as possible against our opponents. That being said, I'm okay with bringing out the consistency and just like going balls to the wall. This is our sideboard in the Mirror Match. The ninth most popular deck is Boros Convoke. I'm a fan of Elesh Norn against this deck. It neuters a lot of the deck. And then we just want to make sure that we have enough blockers and life gain and whatnot to be able to do the thing, take out some consistency, like shaving an oddity, and we're just going to shave 1 elf, and this is how I sideboard against Boros Convoke. And then the last deck is Hidden Strings. Against the Hidden Strings deck, we're bringing in Stonebrain. I'm actually a fan of Pick Your Poison, mostly because a lot of the versions are playing Strict Proctor now, but also are playing 9 lives, and 9 lives is very good against us, and making them sacrifice that enchantment is excellent. Otherwise, we just got to combo as fast as possible, which means we're going to be bringing out some level of consistency. And so I sideboard against Hidden Strings. But there you have had a sideboard against the top 10 most popular decks in Pioneer. And today we're going to look at the flex slots in Mono Green Nykthos, Mono Green Ramp, Mono Green Devotion, whatever you want to call it, because this deck is very good and is very fast. And even though it doesn't have Karn, it's still a combo deck. And so let's jump into it with the Mono Green list with 0 flex slots. So these are the cards you more or less have to play that are stock. So we have 58 cards in the main deck, which means there are only 2 flex slots, 1 land and 1 non-land. And there are 8 cards in the sideboard you pretty much have to play, which means there are 7 flex slots. So what can you choose from? These are the flex slots in the deck. I can make this a little bit bigger though. These are the flex slots in the deck. So for the last land slot, you can either play the 3rd Lair of the Hydra or the single Sunken Citadel. Lair of the Hydra just creates inevitability when you have a bunch of mana. Having man lands is just genuinely good against things like board wipes and whatever, to push through that last bit of damage. And so if you're worried about that, Lair of the Hydra is awesome. Sunken Citadel, the issue with Sunken Citadel is it enters tapped, and we don't love that. But what we can do with Sunken Citadel is we can add 2 mana to activate land abilities. So things like either Lair of the Hydras or Nykthos or Boseiju, we can use Sunken Citadel mana for, and be able to have less mana to do what we need to do, especially with Nykthos. I think that's very powerful. The kind of interesting part about Sunken Citadel is if we have a leyline start, we don't actually need a mana dork to start going off on turn 2, because we can turn 1 Sunken Citadel, turn 2 Nykthos, use the 2 mana from Sunken Citadel to activate Nykthos, have 4 mana or 8 mana, depending on how many leylines we started with. So it adds a kind of an interesting nut hand, but the entering tapped is a bit of a deal breaker. Also, as sort of a side note, you'll notice that one of the flex slots in the sideboard is an off-color card, an Elesh Norn. Sunken Citadel naming white is another way that we'll be able to cast that Elesh Norn, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in the future. As far as the non-land slot, you can choose between an Oath of Nissa and a Polukranos. I think the decision is kind of obvious here, or I guess I don't know the correct decision, but the line of thinking is pretty obvious. The single Oath of Nissa adds consistency to the deck and, you know, early devotion, and Polukranos adds more devotion later on in the game, but is just like another threat and mana dump and whatever. Having more powerful turn 2 plays after we play a turn 1 mana dork can make the deck overall more powerful. So you want to select between these guys for those main deck slots. As far as the 7 cards in the sideboard, there's a lot of cards you can choose from. You have 13 different cards to choose from to fill out those 7 slots. Number 1, Elesh Norn, obviously very good against other decks that care about enter the battlefield things. So like, you know, the mirror match, maybe Convoke, you know, stuff like that. It's off color, which isn't a huge deal. So if you look at the no flex slots thing, one Sunken Citadel can fix it if we want to. But also if we start with a leyline, things tap for every color mana. Also Outcaster Trailblazer can add white if we want it to. There's a lot of ways that we can have white in our deck. Again, also Sunken Citadel, you know, if we decide to play Sunken Citadel. So the off color is a little annoying. Also Storm the Festival can just hit it. But it can be very powerful in just game ending against certain decks. Sharpshooter is an interesting 2-in-1 card where it's a reasonable amount of pips, is a 4/4 with reach, which is really good against all of these Slickshot show-off decks. But also it destroys an artifact or enchantment, so we can bring it in for those Slickshot show-off decks as an early blocker, and it's an artifact and enchantment card we can bring in, so it's kind of interesting. Sidestian Petitioner, there's a lot of crazy aggro decks out now. The red-green aggro and red-black aggro specifically are nuts. Gaining life equal to devotion to green can gain an obscene amount of life, especially since itself is 2 devotion, which means it's also a reasonable amount of mana pips for Nykthos. Polukranos Reborn in the sideboard is interesting. It has a lot of the same things that we'd like for Polukranos in the main deck. It just adds another threat, you know, it's a lot of pips, you know, whatever. But also it having reach and also not dying to Reckless Rage makes it a little bit better than Scrap Shooter against the Slickshot decks, but it's just a body that can become a scarier body. So, meh. Obstinate Baloth is kind of interesting against discard decks, but also it's a guaranteed 4 life that you can play instead of Sidestian Petitioner. Nylea's Intervention is a new-ish innovation. You can choose one, search your library for up to X land cards, reveal them, put into your hand, then shuffle, which means you can grab your Nykthos, you can grab your Boseijus, whatever, it isn't just forests. Or Nylea's Intervention deals twice X damage to each creature with flying. So this is like really good in like grabbing our like things that we might need in our deck, like the Nykthos, so we can actually combo, but also like really decent against decks that have a lot of flyers. So I'm thinking like Phoenix, the Slickshot show-off decks, you know, stuff like that. I think it's kind of interesting. The third Stonebrain is an option. Stonebrain is very good against these combo decks, like the Mirror Match naming Nykthos or against Lotus. And then a Licensed Hearse is just additional graveyard hate. So mostly for Phoenix, but there are other decks that use the graveyard as well that, you know, is pretty scary. So you're going to be selecting one of these lands, one of these non-lands for your main deck, and then 7 of any combination of these 13 cards for your sideboard as you continue to tune Mono Green Nykthos. And I wanted to go over some nuances with the Mono Green Nykthos, Mono Green Devotion deck in Pioneer. Because while I've talked about the deck as a whole, I've talked about sideboarding with it, I've talked about flex slots, it's important to understand a lot of the weird stuff involved with this deck. And I wanted to lead this off with how to combo with the deck, because the deck is decidedly still a combo deck, even though it doesn't have Karn. Yes, it has a big green guy beat down alternative plan, but primarily you're looking to combo. And the way that you combo is by getting a ton of devotion, drawing a ridiculous amount of cards with Kiora and Outcaster Trailblazer, getting many creatures on the battlefield, untapping Nykthos with Kioras or extra Kioras that you draw to add even more mana, hitting more Nykthoses with like Cavalier to add even more mana, etc., etc., etc. Until you have a bunch of creatures and a bunch of mana, and then you play an Ulvenwald oddity, flip it, everything has haste and trample, and then you jam. That's the combo. And so all of your plays should be working towards that combo if you can. In addition, some other things that you might need to know about. Leyline of the Guildpact, as you probably know, is in the deck just for its devotion to green. It's 4 green pips. But also remember, if you have a Leyline of the Guildpact, your lands tap for any colored mana, including your Nykthos. So if you're worried about cards like Stonebrain or other extraction effects, you can play a Leyline of the Guildpact during your pregame actions, and then your first land can just be Nykthos, and you can still play your Mana Dork while getting around those extraction effects, which is kind of cool. One of the weirdest things about this deck when you first pick it up is the Outcaster Trailblazer timings. And the biggest thing about Outcaster Trailblazer is, again, remember this is a combo deck. If you were just trying to beat down, of course you would never plot Outcaster Trailblazer, or very rarely plot Outcaster Trailblazer, but you want to create really big turns. And if giving up 4 damage and plotting Outcaster Trailblazer on turn 2 or turn 3 means that you can have it come off plot to create a mana so you can play a Cavalier a turn earlier, or a Storm the Festival a turn earlier, or multi-spell, is way better. Or even better, like plot the Outcaster Trailblazer when you have 3 mana, next turn play Kiora, and then cast Outcaster Trailblazer off of plot to be able to draw a card off of Kiora, because drawing extra cards is extremely important when you're trying to combo, is where you should probably be with this deck. However, it normally being right to plot Outcaster Trailblazer does not mean High Noon goes away. So remember, High Noon exists when you're playing this card, because having something come off plot it counts as a spell. Sometimes when you Storm the Festival, you're going to hit a Kiora and a creature when you already have a Kiora on the battlefield. Understand that everything enters, and then the Planeswalker thing, like Legendary Rule, happens. So both Kioras are going to see that creature enter from Storm the Festival before the Planeswalker thing happens, so you'll be drawing 2 cards. Just important to remember. And this is true of the old Nykthos deck as well. But be sure to activate Nykthos, if you can, in most situations. Activate Nykthos in response to the Cavalier of Thorns trigger in case you hit another Nykthos, because you don't have a chance to activate Nykthos again before grabbing that extra Nykthos and putting it on the battlefield from Cavalier of Thorns and them legendarying each other out. So say you have access to 9 mana, one of them's a Nykthos, you Storm the Festival, 3 mana left over, including Nykthos, hit a Cavalier. Awesome. So you want that Cavalier to enter the battlefield. But before the Cavalier trigger actually resolves, you can activate Nykthos and get the devotion from Cavalier counting towards Nykthos. And then if you hit another Nykthos off of Cavalier, it's even better. I think everybody that has learned this deck has encountered a situation where you hit the second Nykthos off of Cavalier and you like roll your eyes because you could have had so much more mana. So just remember that. And in that same vein, navigate your turns in a sense that the Cavalier resolving is one of the last things going on, so that you can get maximum devotion off of Nykthos and you aren't like hemorrhaging devotion by doing that like in response to the Cavalier trigger trick. But those are the big nuances, in my opinion, in this mono green deck. If you have any more, leave them in the comments. I hope you guys like this video. If you did, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.